So time now for our news review, where we take you through the morning papers. This morning I'm joined by Paul McNamee, UK editor of The Big Issue, and Martina Bett, political correspondent at The Sun. So very good morning to both of you, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
You can still say that now, can't you, on the 3rd? I think you can. So we're going to start off with a story that has dominated the front pages for the last couple of days, this appalling fire in a Swiss bar.
Yeah.
Paul, you've picked out The Guardian's coverage to start off with, and the suggestion from authorities yesterday that they believe the cause was probably these sparklers attached to champagne bottles inside that bar.
Yes, I mean, it is such a horror, particularly, I think, because so many of the people inside were just kids, and either losing their life or so terribly maimed, and what lives they have ahead of them. And so, as you were leading with on the news bulletin, there is now footage showing these sound mufflers on the roof of the basement bar catching fire and then spreading quickly, and it's now becoming. It's now believed by experts that this is the cause of the terrible blaze. And a number of papers have got this. They also have got some more information about the owners and some of the precautions that they have said that they've taken. That Jacques and Jessica Moretti, who took over the bar 10 years ago, they were in it and they managed to get out. I think they said that Jessica, the owner, she suffered some burns. I don't know about Jacques. But they claim that over the last 10 years, since they've taken over, the bar has been checked 3 times and has met the safety requirements each time. So it does. There's so many questions still about how they were allowed to have this kind of material in the bar. It looks like it's flammable, and then whether there will be criminal prosecutions brought because of that. But at the base of it, it's just the human tragedy of it all, and these lives lost.
Absolutely, and the human tragedy playing out on other of the front pages. The front of the Daily Mail pictures one girl who's been named as missing, and again, so many questions still about the missing. Absolute agony for the families involved because of how difficult it is to identify those who have died, given the nature of the death.
Yeah, so there's just former people from the UK that is among those missing. As you say, families are still appealing for information, and I think for parents especially, you know, I'm not a parent myself, but I think reading stories like this must be just horror. You know, Paul was mentioning the videos that have emerged as well. You know, the fact that some of the partygoers lost crucial seconds to film what was happening rather than running away, again, just adds to the tragedy of it. In terms of the questions that people are rightly asking, the owners have said that they've checked the material and that the venue had been checked, but obviously there's an investigation going on. And, you know, if they're found to, if they think the investigation concludes that there are grounds for negligence, the owners could face charges for negligent homicide, which is what we saw happening in Turkey last year with that fire. So we'll have to see what happens. And obviously, again, it's just like the human toll and the fact that it was so young is just heartbreaking.
Absolutely. So we wait to see what happens as far as identification is concerned, but already we know that the death toll is at least 40 people have died and more than 100 in hospital. Let's move on to some of the other stories also dominating headlines. At the front of the Daily Telegraph, Martina, focuses on Iran and Trump's threat to the regime there.
That's right. So Trump earlier this week said that he would step in to stop these protests that started a few days ago. They started because of the economic situation that's happening in Iran. We saw their currency plummeting. Inflation, I think, is the main issue and the reason why these protests started. In fact, it was lots of shopkeepers that basically couldn't deal with the cost of living anymore and took to the streets, and then they started spreading. Now, Donald Trump earlier this week said that the US military was locked and loaded and was going to wait and see what Iran was going to do. And then last night, Iranian security forces opened fire on protesters, which is interesting because for the last few days, lots of people were thinking, oh, maybe we saw the president of Iran saying we want to listen to the protesters. We understand that there's economic pressures happening, in part for US economic sanctions, but also for what we saw with Israel, the 12-day war, and what's happening widely in the region. Now, this is definitely an escalation. We'll have to see what Donald Trump does. The fact that there could be US military intervention is pretty serious in terms of what could happen. If this protest spread, what we saw in 2022, there were more than 100 people, Iranian people, dying as a result of this. But, you know, the question that the UK would be asking, people here would be asking, is this that moment where it might spread, where the conflict might spread? So, yeah, it's a very difficult situation.
Yeah, and a lot of analysis is being made about whether or not these protests are different from previous protests. We have seen people take to the streets before. We saw women, obviously, involved in protests about their conditions not so long ago. And even back in 2017, I think there were large protests. It's whether or not this develops into anything different this time round.
It is. If it reaches a critical mass and if it continues to be a very grassroots movement that the state cannot suppress, that is the interesting question. The other side of it is, what exactly does Donald Trump mean? I mean, he is a man full of bombast and ridiculous notions, but what does it mean when he says they're locked and loaded? It can't surely mean that he's going to launch strikes against Iran. I know he said he's going to go and rescue protesters.
He said if protesters are killed, the US will come to the rescue,
yes, but
didn't he?
Again, it's unclear. It feels as though it's just kind of tokenistic language from him to show that he's the big man. If he really does want to help the protesters, well, let's see what that means in reality, to help perhaps make sure that they are not suppressed by giving them means to stand up against the government. It is just not clear. It feels as though it's just another thing that allows him to say he's involved with a conflict in another part of the world.
Do you think that, Martina, or do you think the threat itself could change the behaviour of the regime? Because Donald Trump is unpredictable and they don't know quite how to interpret.
Well, actually, in a way, the fact that Donald Trump said so might incentivise the Iranians to do something about the protests and crack down on them because they don't like the fact that there's foreign interference. At the same time, the reason why I think the presidency was being a little bit more cautious and saying that they wanted to listen to the protesters was that they know that actually cracking down on them might fuel this anger. So it's all to play. And again, we're going to have to see what Donald Trump does now that there's been this development overnight.
Yeah, exactly. See if there is any kind of action or any further words of warning. Let's stay on the front page of the Telegraph, though, Paul, because you wanted to talk about David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, talking about signing up new magistrates, but he's also got a drive to target younger people getting involved.
Yeah, this is an ongoing rollout from David Lammy. When last year he revealed he wanted to cut jury trials, potentially in Crown Court, that would make them move to magistrates
for some cases.
For cases that reached a particular threshold, or rather didn't exceed a particular threshold of potential incarceration. But this means we know there's a backlog in both magistrate and Crown Court, not just because of availability of magistrates and judges, but because of the terrible state of the courts themselves. However, this is what David Lammy is now suggesting: 2,000 more magistrates of what he describes every age and background within the next financial year. And some of those, he says, he wants to make 18-year-old, to bring them in, to get their experience and to have them involved in the judicial system. I'm not sure that's a great idea. I know that there's a lot of talk about lowering the voting age, and there's another story related to that. That's one thing, but having an 18-year-old sit and bring judgment on somebody, on whatever it is, whether it's from a driving ban, potential driving ban, or something more serious that has brought somebody to magistrates' court, I know that they would get legal advice, but it doesn't feel as though they necessarily will bring enough weight and knowledge to that particular situation.
Do you think that's right? I mean, obviously this drive is all part of clearing this backlog and encouraging more people to get involved. What do you think about the youngsters' idea of it? I mean, do you think there's the idea that if you engage people young, they feel they're more involved in society, and they have the ability to apply their brains like anybody else to this issue? What do you make of it?
I think it would make quite a lot of listeners uneasy, actually, because magistrates are not just volunteers. They actually have the power of taking someone's liberty. And despite the fact that they're 18, you're a legal adult, you still haven't got the sort of experience. You might have not had a job. You might have not encountered a justice system before. And when it comes to clearing the court backlogs, you know, delays are not caused by the fact that we haven't got enough teenagers as magistrates. They're caused by the fact that our justice system has been underfunded, by the fact that there's not enough court space. So a lot of people might see this as a bit of sticking plaster politics that doesn't really solve the problem. You know, the kind of thing that Keir Starmer said they wanted to get rid of, this sticking plaster politics. You might be doing exactly the same. OK, yeah. And you mentioned, Paul, the fact that there are stories in the papers about young people voting. There is one, you're absolutely right, it's in the Times. And it's talking about 12-year-olds saying, oh, what, we can vote in 2029? Yeah,
this is a piece of research that was conducted by a policy group called Public First in association with the Children's Commissioner of England. They went into schools in Durham and Bristol. They asked Year 8 pupils who are 12, do they know they're going to vote in the next election, June 2029? And the majority said no, they didn't. Which this story seems to think that is a terrible thing. I'm not sure it's a massive surprise. The thing that is a surprise is that how well 12-year-olds could read the coded messages of some things that are going on in the streets, like flags and what that meant for immigration and what that meant for a sense of belonging and when it was welcome and when it was not a welcome. I think that's quite sophisticated thinking from 12-year-olds, frankly. Anyway, Dame Rachel de Souza, who is the Children's Commissioner, has used this and is now calling for democracy lessons from a very early age in schools, which is a good idea.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
I think it would be a good idea, especially if, if the government goes ahead and lowers the voting age. And it was also interesting that highly visible figures such as Nigel Farage were widely recognised by this focus group, but children couldn't recognise Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. They still thought Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister, so that's quite interesting as well.
That is interesting as well. Well, we've got a way till the next general election, we think. You never know, but interesting to see how that younger generation prepares itself. We're out of time, but we'll see you again next hour. Thanks both very much indeed. Thank you.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?